The MIW Disruptive podcast is sponsored by Mentorch. Mentorch is a social development network for mentorship. Go to mentorch.app to seek knowledge and leave a legacy.
Welcome to the Disruptive podcast by Minority Innovation Weekend. Minority Innovation Weekend is a weekend summit dedicated to aiding minority innovators launch tech-focused startups, exploring emerging technologies, and showcasing tech startups that have a minority founder or co-founder. During each episode, we will discuss innovation, news about tech startup, as well as the startup ecosystem, and interview people of color throughout the startup ecosystem. Welcome to the MIW Disruptive Podcast, hosted by Sir Walter and Jerome. Today we are joined by a lovely person, a leader in healthcare innovation and strategy. I am talking about Tsahia Hobson. How are you?
I am wonderful. Thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
This was a good day. Let's go ahead and get kicked off. What prompted your interest and desire to pursue a career in healthcare?
Well, sure. It's an interesting story because I originally had no desire to be in healthcare. When I kind of started out my career, I was working at Columbia University Medical Center. I was living in Brooklyn. I just needed a job. But I found a position with the Med Center in the division of neonatology. I kind of, grew to like it. And I was also doing a bachelor's degree in economics at City College because originally I wanted to be a banker or, an investor. And it's funny because I was thinking about this morning when I made that decision about, wanting to go into investments. I was on a bus actually with a girlfriend of mine from New York to, I think, DC. We were going to Howard's homecoming and we were formulating this whole plan for my life, right? About getting this degree in economics. But by the time I got my bachelor's degree, it was in 2008 and the economy just tanked, if you can remember. Being in New York was really rough for all the bankers, all these companies were shutting down. And so I decided maybe it's not such a bad idea to stay with the medical center. I really enjoy the people who I'm working with. And I started to feel like as my career was progressing, my work was becoming much more impactful. And I could see those results, I think, not just in clinical research, but also in patient care and, operational functions and design. So that kind of was the start of me kind of wanting to stay in healthcare and saying, let me kind of look at this. I also think that just personally being a patient who had Medicaid in New York City in the early 2000s was such an unpleasant experience versus when I had commercial, health insurance through the company was a better experience, right? How I was treated. And so I wanted to kind of tackle some of those challenges. And, and also I thought about, some family members, their struggles with the healthcare system and really wanting to do something to impact patient lives and, also be transformative. So a lot of things I think personally and professionally had me kind of go into this career in healthcare.
That's awesome. That is awesome. So what are some of the innovation in healthcare tech that you're working on or have worked on?
Yeah, definitely. So early on in my career, one of the innovations that kind of still sticks with me is creating, I would say actually leading the implementation of a real-time data streaming platform in the neonatal ICU. So at that time, you can imagine being in a NICU as a baby, this baby's connected to all these wires, all these, different machinery, machines, And I even recall kind of taking a visit to the NICU with one of the doctors who had just performed open heart surgery on a premature baby. I mean, which to me is just a miracle and incredible. And so, but at the time, even though they had all this technology and they were doing all these advanced surgeries, there was no way to capture the data, right, that was happening real time. And so the purpose of that implementation was to impact clinical research, and of course to impact patient care. And specifically, it was targeting retinopathy. So if you are in the hospital, and in this case in babies, and even in like diabetic patients, if you get too much oxygen or if you get too little oxygen, it can have negative consequences on eyesight. And so that was really the problem that we were trying to solve, right? How do you collect this data in real time so that once oxygen levels reach a certain level where a possible adverse effect can happen, how do you get, that data to allow doctors and nurses to intervene, right? And how do you trend that data over time? So that was definitely one. Also, when I was in New York, I met the founder of a company called Optic Surge, and we really kind of hit it off. She is a woman of color, surgeon, tackling kind of surgical challenges and real-time data streaming in the surgical setting, something for surgeons. So using augmented reality in these situations, because you can imagine, and I think part of her use case was that, she's my height, which is about 5'2", but you could also be working with a surgeon who's like 6'5", right? So where do you place these monitors? Down here, or do you place them up here? And also, how do you, kind of continuously get the data that you need when you need it, right? Healthcare has a ton of data, but sometimes we're not able to get the data to the right people at the right time. And so I think a solution such as that is something, that's innovative. We've certainly talked about, tried to partner with other organizations, and just kind of spread the word about her technology and this innovation. And I would say something else that's kind of exciting for me that I'm not necessarily working on from a technical perspective, but just in my own research, is understanding, I would say, the Black landscape, right? Who are the Black founders in healthcare technology? Who are the investors who are investing in Black healthcare technology? And, healthcare tech can span, I think, a wide range from clinical care, care management, pharma, research, wearables, interoperability, all of these things. So I want to know who these people are, and also kind of work on ways in closing the funding gap for these startups. Because I think, and this is something we can talk about, right? We're at this very unique time where we have an opportunity to speak to our unique situations, being Black in healthcare, as well as create solutions, right, for folks who look like us in our communities. So I would say those are kind of a couple of the innovations, like working with and as well as thinking about.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the prenatal data streaming, or
Sure.
was it prenatal, or is it the baby's already born?
Babies are already born. So these are
Okay.
premature babies, or babies who have, high or, maybe born with, certain complex cases and need to be monitored long-term in an ICU.
And was it just the oxygen you were concerned about, or was it heart rate, or
Mm-hmm.
temperature?
Sure.
What other things were you streaming?
Yeah, so at that time, the focus was retinopathy. So it was really focused on the oxygen levels. But I think as time went on, and since that time, the software has been upgraded, with new systems. So I think they have evolved in terms of targeting, different data aspects like heart rate, blood oxygen levels, maybe pulse, right? Different things like that, breathing rate and ability. So I'm not sure exactly, what they're focused on now, but I can tell you, yes, at that time, that's specifically kind of the problem we were trying to tackle.
Earlier on, you were also talking about like the limitation of Medicare, Medicaid. So I was reading also that you were inspired by Sweden socialized healthcare system. So what exactly inspired you about that?
Yeah, so I guess just a little backstory. The first time I was in Sweden, my mom took me to Sweden as a little baby. So my family's from Jamaica, but one of my aunts had left Jamaica to go to Denmark to teach English, and she eventually settled there. So my mom took me as a baby to Sweden and also to Copenhagen in Denmark. Um, Fast forward to me being an adult, I still have cousins who are over in Denmark, and so got some friends together, and we sort of did this travel blitz of going from, I think it was like Iceland, Reykjavik, to Amsterdam, Stockholm, Copenhagen, and I kind of fell in love with Stockholm. It reminded me a bit of New York, but it was just very modern, very clean, and I'm also fascinated by other countries' healthcare systems. How do they function, whether they're socialized, whether they have some piece of, you have to buy some health insurance, or you have, do you have nothing? Is there community care? What's working, what's not? So, because I love Sweden so much, I said, it'd be great to just find an opportunity to study abroad and kind of understand like the ins and outs of their healthcare system. So that's when I found a program, and I think it was about 2 weeks. Went over there with the program, traveled through multiple cities in Stockholm, and I think what I saw was that there's a level, and it may not sound like innovation, right? But there's a level of dignity that they treat their citizens with when it comes to the healthcare system, whether that is long-term care, for example, in the nursing homes, even just the design and the architecture of these spaces, right, that are designed to be friendly and welcoming and not look like, prison cells, and simplistic design. I think the Scandinavians, right, they're really famous for their kind of simplistic, modern, and Scandinavian style design. And I think when you apply that to healthcare, it can really be beneficial for the patient, right? Because you can think about, of course, you want to be home, but at the same time, if I'm in an environment that reminds me of home, that has natural light, natural wood, gardens, I even remember walking into one of these nursing home facilities, and you could just smell like fresh food cooking, cookies that were being baked. And, and I get the sense, like in some of our kind of long-term care or nursing facilities, it's not quite as friendly. I think that also one of the big innovations in Sweden, and I think in Scandinavia, some of these like socialized systems, is that the primary care provider is truly the gatekeeper of your clinical care. So you can think about that in the US if you had, let's say, an HMO plan. And so with an HMO plan, you would have to see your primary care provider. And then if you needed a referral for like an orthopedist or, a pulmonologist, you would need to get a referral from that person. The Swedish healthcare system is like that, where most of the care is delivered by primary care physicians. They really get a full understanding of the patient and what their symptoms, and complications are. And they're able to, because it's socialized too, right? They're able to form this very long connection with the patient. So, compare that with the US. If you lose your job, you're uninsured. You're not going to be able to see your same doctor. If you switch insurance plans, your doctor might be out of network. You may have seen that doctor for 10 years, but now they don't accept your new insurance. So you've lost that connection. Now you have to go somewhere else. What happens to your data? And so in, societies like Sweden and Denmark, you have this kind of streaming of data, if you will, from birth to death, right? Because it's all kind of contained within within the system. And that in itself is very innovative, because I think in the US, many companies have tried to tackle the interoperability. How do we collect all of your data, right? What and what even is that? What is all of our healthcare data? But how can we get that all together on one platform? And so far, it hasn't quite been fully successful yet. So I definitely think, you know, those few things about Sweden, you know, just having, you know, this dignity, right, treating everybody as equal, how you care for patients in long-term facilities, right, having primary care practices as kind of gatekeepers of care, and also not just to say, well, primary care is important, but paying those doctors more than you're paying some of the specialists, right? Here it's very skewed, right? We are paying, let's say, you know, hypothetically, a primary care doctor in New York, $100,000 a year salary. Meanwhile, you have an orthopedic surgeon or a dermatologist who's doing lots and lots of procedures, right? Getting paid sometimes millions of dollars per year. But yet we're also saying that primary care is important. Well, the fact is we're not paying for it. And so I think other countries, they really get it, and they, you know, they understand that primary care needs to be kind of the gatekeeper of patient care. And I think that in itself is a very innovative concept.
That seems like a easy solution, like having data in a common format. But I guess not everybody has their solution to the problem, and everybody hasn't agreed upon it.
That's right. And, you know, and I think if you look at who are the healthcare players, right? Consumers, how do you even, I mean, do you even know how you get your medical history, right? If you think about the time from your last doctor to that other specialist that you saw at the other hospital, to when you were 20, to when you were 5, to even 10 years ago, right? Do you even know how, as a, you know, just a I don't know exactly how to do it either, right? I try, you know, I can't remember even all of the physicians that I've seen, you know, in history, like in my life, let alone if you cross states, right? You know, forget about it. But there's still, you know, I'm an optimist, and I think there's still a huge opportunity for us to tackle this challenge. But I think going back to what I was saying, like, you know, you think about consumers, right? How do consumers get their healthcare data? How do payers, like health insurance companies, right? They're getting data now from lots of different sources. They're getting it from claims. They're getting it sometimes directly from electronic medical records from doctors' offices. But the way in which that data comes in is very different. So how do you even consolidate that data from, let's say, claim system, actuary, billing, electronic medical records, right? And I think there are a couple of companies now that are trying to tackle some of that to sort of streamline, you know, the collection of it, but it's still not quite a perfect system, because, you know, some of the systems that we have in place in healthcare are very much legacy systems that need to be upgraded, that need to be replaced, but it's bulky, it's expensive, it's time consuming. And the ultimate question in healthcare, right, is who's going to pay for it? You know, who's going to pay for it? Whether you're at the payer level, is that members' money, right? The premiums that you're getting, is that employers' money? You know, the money that you're getting, is that a worthwhile, you know, sort of endeavor? Each business has to sort of figure out the ROI, you know, on that, and how valuable and important it is. Because like I said, I mean, it's incredibly expensive. I recall too, when I was at Columbia, I think they were implementing Epic, which is, you know, one of the largest electronic health record companies. And in fact, for, you know, a system like Columbia or NYU, Northwell, I'm remembering Sutter Health, let's say, maybe even, I'm trying to think of who's in DC, like a Kaiser Permanente, I believe. When you're talking about implementing, like going from paper records to electronic health records and streamlining, all of that data, I mean, it can cost $1 billion, right? And you think about it, what hospital has $1 billion to spend on doing this? But it is something that's necessary. And so I think the other problem that you see is you have hospital systems that can do that, but in some sense, it's almost bankrupting them. And then what happens to the smaller independent practices? How do they kind of, get on board with these electronic health records so that they can get their data into a similar system as, these larger companies, so that data can, I don't know, in fact, sort of look the same, right? Or be delivered in the same way. So you can start to see like where some of the disparities can already, happen just in that, even though we have the systems in place that can do it.
Yeah, so you also led an IT team that designed enterprise architecture for implementing data sharing and remote monitoring. So what are the ethical limitations on the use of data that's collected automatically?
Yeah, I was thinking about this question in, a couple of different ways. So, I would say looking at, again, sort of the different players in healthcare, in one sense, if it go back to an academic medical center, like Columbia University or, Northwestern, any of these kind of Johns Hopkins, right, those type of organizations, they do research. And so one way, right, that patients want to be protected is, having their clinical trial data, of course, protected. And they also want to have their electronic health records protected. I think that organizations like academic medical centers and hospitals, they go through great lengths to protect patient data. Also, insurance companies, they too also go through to great lengths to protect patient data. And that includes, sharing data with potential startups, sharing data for analysis purposes, right? Because nowadays we're getting so much data, right, that all of the analysis can't be done in-house. And so one example, and I'm trying to remember, I think this was the Mayo Clinic that I believe Google had recently contracted with, right? You can look at it this way. So there's a contract for the healthcare sort of data management and analysis. And you can put terms in your contract where it says, we will send, Google de-identified data, so that just even in this healthcare section, they're not able to sort of trace this data back to who exactly that patient is. So we're going to strip out certain identifiers so that the patient's privacy remains intact, right? Then you, of course, have Google. That's our regular Google. Like we go on and we, kind of maybe go to Dr. Google, right? We're looking up all kinds of symptoms and ailments and things like that, right? Then there's that privacy area. And so I actually think that's probably the larger privacy issue in terms of how are tech companies, right, non-healthcare companies sharing and using our identifiable data. And I think in the case of the Google contract, they put controls in place so that it was like, in the healthcare portion, we're going to de-identify this data so that Google employees can't sort of go back and understand and tell who, patient X is, right? But we want to trend some data, and look at some things that are going on. And then, there's a contract and the terms so that given the data that you have here, Google employees are not going to be able to sort of analyze that or get their hands on it so that they can use the existing kind of tracking and analysis that Google does to sort of say, well, this patient has these conditions and lives in the city of Baltimore, Maryland. and then go to the analytics side and let me see, like, who was Googling, this, this prescription, and then trace it back to that patient, right? So there are very strict protocols, I think, that go into place to prevent that kind of, data sharing from happening. I think also on the payer side, so health insurance companies, right? All these regulated bodies, there are very strict protocols that are put in place to prevent, certain types of, of data sharing and provisions for what partner companies can and cannot do with the data, that must abide by, our laws and regulations. But I think that where it does get fuzzy is when we're tracking our own data, right? So for example, with Apple, women can now track things like, in addition to, your steps or your blood pressure, you can track like your menstrual cycle, right? Do I want Apple to have that data? What is it going to do with that data? Can I get that data back? Can I erase it? I think these are some of the new questions that are coming up. But I think, to your point, still, it's like, well, if I'm a patient in a hospital, how can I opt out from maybe having my data shared, even if it is de-identified? There are definitely options, I think, within clinical trials, but then as a patient, you may often not understand if they're going to take that de-identified data and do something with it. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think there are necessarily forms that say, I don't want my data shared with, like, certain other companies. But I think through HIPAA provisions, as I said, there's some blanket protections on that. But still, it's a bit of a gray area that I think, as technology evolves, right, these agreements and laws need to evolve as well.
See, Apple and other tech companies, they kind of have a new focus on real-time health stats. Earlier you mentioned other ways or other statistics they can draw from the sensor data they're collecting. Do you think there's opportunity for other companies to integrate similar sensing into their other products?
Now, do you mean like Apple Watch, Apple, like
any of the wearables?
wearables?
It doesn't have to be Apple.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a ton of opportunity in that space, and there are definitely a number of wearables and they often target certain disease. Like, for example, monitoring diabetes, like insulin levels, right, or blood sugar. They're monitoring sort of like that. There's also like remote home monitoring, especially for patients who are doing, let's say, home dialysis, right? There's so many different types of wearables. I'm thinking back to a conference. I mean, they even have wearables where if you need, if you're not standing up straight, like, it'll monitor, your posture. There are devices, I think it was a company called Pavlok that was targeting different behaviors. Like, for example, if you were an obsessive nail biter, I think you would wear the device and it might shock you. I'm probably I haven't read their website in a while, but so that's kind of something that I remember. There's new kind of devices and contact lenses that are happening. Oh my goodness, pills, probably that's the next frontier that you can swallow to see like what you were eating. Did you take your medication on time? So many, so many different things. I'm just trying to think of a few that I don't wear a lot of wearables myself. I have my iPhone, and when I'm on a walk, I'm like, oh, you've counted my steps, 10,000. I'm good, right? But there are other people who really, love these devices. So, and I think, in addition to like some of these sensor products, right? It's certainly patients entering their data into apps, right? And patients, it actually, I think you can do eye exams now, with your phone and, all kinds of monitoring, because now in this era of like telehealth, we're doing much more monitoring, of our own health and our own selves. And so we can now transmit that data to our physicians. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of companies, I think startup companies too, that are trying to, trying to get into that space and figure out where they can have the most benefit, especially I think in certain disease spaces, like, looking at hypertension, looking at diabetes, congestive heart failure. What are some, things that we can do to sort of monitor a patient's health, right? Even in complex care, people with MS, detecting falls, right? How do you prevent falls from happening? Can you create a device to notify the person, a fall might happen just by kind of this device observing and testing, their gait and their walk. So many opportunities. I feel like it's interesting because at some point too, it's kind of like, how do you choose the best one for you? How do we choose the best device for for us? Yeah, but that's still that's still a question up in the air for me.
Gotcha. So one of the big things that we've been talking about for the last couple of questions is data. So what is the best way to acquire a patient's informed consent to use of predictive analytics and other advanced analysis techniques that are based on the patient's private data?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think a simple way is to ask them, to ask them, do you want us to use your data in this way? Certainly for, clinical trials, there are a number of ways, consent forms that patients have to consent to, being a part of a clinical trial and understanding, what can happen with my data. Do I want this? Do I consent to this? It might be, it might be time for a new consent form, let's say just in healthcare in general, when you go into your doctor's office, as more and more kind of data collection and, data gathering and storage happens on patients, right? But I think a very simple way is to educate the patient and to ask the patient, hey, do you want to be part of this study? And I think one of my colleagues whom you know or may get to know, Dr. Camille White, she does a lot of work with a group called for the NIH, National Institutes of Health, their All of Us program, right? And it's really to inform and educate patients about, submitting their data, because we need data in the healthcare industry on patients. And I think in educating people about why this is important, I think it can also help to build trust in the industry. A lot of us, and rightfully so, have a poor history with the healthcare system. There's a lot of mistrust, whether it's happened to us personally or it's happened to loved ones. And so programs like All of Us, right, really look at, how do we collect data? How do we educate, members, the American public to want to give data? But also, I think one of the NIH's huge initiatives was to start looking, years ago at sex and gender differences, right? What happens, in different, in different genders, male versus, female, because your experience in the healthcare system, right, as men is going to be different from my experience, as a woman. And how do, and I think the next frontier is something, we call precision medicine, in looking at all of, the different sort of areas and aspects of a person's life, what makes them whole, and developing targeted treatments and therapies, right, for that. And so I think that, data gathering, data sharing is important, but I think we should educate the public on why it's important. I think we should develop systems and programs to allow the public to have more trust and faith in the system. And one of the ways we do that is to have conversations like this, and to have, doctors like, Dr. White out there front and center, educating the public, kind of helping to regain that trust, and, communicating, well, why is it important that Black women, age 35 to 45 participate in this study, right? Because let's say, for example, with fibroids, we know that, and I should ask you, do you know a Black woman who's had surgery for fibroids?
I do.
Okay. And you, Sir Walter?
I do as well, yes.
Right. I myself have had to have multiple fibroid surgeries. Why is that? Right? Why is that? They are uncomfortable, painful surgeries. I have the scars to bear, right? And I don't know why I got fibroids. I don't know why so many of my Black female friends have had fibroid surgery, right? So I think, even in an example like that, there's something to be said for collecting this data, doing this kind of research, and really understanding, why do we have to suffer so much from fibroids, right? Why do we have to have these invasive surgeries? Why do they grow so fast and cause us, so many issues? What's going on? And so the way we can tackle that is to get the research, get the data, and have folks like us really, looking at that data and trying to identify trends and solutions.
I guess getting the data from the younger generation is probably not going to be that issue. People seem to be willing to share lots of information.
Yeah, it's true, but sometimes, like, I have to admit, I'm surprised, by what my dad, does online, right? That he himself, like, even in this era of COVID, or my aunt, they're having to have like telehealth visits, right? Because they're also, the population that, they don't want to expose them unnecessarily to COVID, right? They're most at risk. I think kind of, just being Black and seeing how COVID has affected the Black community, and also, the age, and if they have any, other underlying health conditions, right? And so I think maybe, yes, the younger generation is willing. I might think about it like this too. I think maybe the younger generation is willing to share more data in terms, like, perhaps with the world, on like Instagram or, social media and or in apps. But maybe the older generation, right, they're willing to share data with their doctors if they know that this is going towards their treatment plan, right? If they know that this is something that is going to help them in the long run with their condition. That they are open and that they are willing. And something, this is not necessarily a data conversation, but I remember a while back, I was working with two colleagues from Columbia, and we were actually pitching drug delivery using drones in the state of New York, which at that time, a couple years ago, right, it was unheard of. And you're kind of like, drones, delivering drugs, pharmaceuticals in New York City, no, but, it's kind of thinking big. And we have kind of come back to some of this idea of how do we use, drones or, anything, transportation to get products to people when they need it. And I had asked my aunt, I said, first, well, would you accept like your pharmaceutical, your medications by mail? And she's like, yeah, I already get it by mail. I was like, oh, okay. What if a drone delivered it? And she's kind of like, well, I don't care who delivers it, as long as it's safe, as long as I can use it and it comes when it's supposed to come, right? So I think that it's a slightly different mindset, and I don't want to speak to two generations, but I'm just, from my observation, that's kind of what I'm thinking about, that, for the older generation, if they know like their medication is coming on time, if they know this is going to help their treatment, they're good, right? I know what I need to know. And then maybe the younger generation is, more interested in apps, entering their own information, controlling their own information, things like that. So, but, so I don't know. I guess there's just different ways, you could think about it, and, different ways you can look at it. But I'm always surprised by, what people are willing to share and why they're willing to share what they share.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one.
True.
Right. But so in the race to develop a vaccine,
Yes.
treatments, therapeutics for COVID-19, how does the healthcare industry ensure that potential risks to patient and caregivers of these new treatments are properly balanced with the potential rewards they promise?
Wow, what a question. I think that it is, and, I'm not necessarily a vaccine expert, right? But I think that there are a couple of considerations, that come to mind. First of all, is the vaccine safe, right? Is the vaccine effective, right? That's the next, consideration. Is it affordable? And can the vaccine be distributed, equally across different communities, right? To prevent any kind of, racial or, systemic bias from one class receiving the vaccine over another class. I think the challenge too in a COVID vaccine is that this is kind of like unprecedented development time. We are in a crisis. We need a vaccine immediately. Vaccines tend to go through years of clinical trials to test safety as well as efficacy. The other challenge that we're facing right now, without having, time to test these things, that are critical to, I think, vaccine testing, is we don't know also if initial results come back, that if the vaccine is proven safe and effective for the short term, what does that mean for the long term, right? What does that mean a year from now? What does that mean 2 years from now? And also, there are different types of like vaccine therapies. And actually I would say this, like, for example, maybe, what's a vaccine? Like a tetanus shot, I think, or, a zoster vaccine. I believe those are like one-time shots, or you might need to get something, every 10 years. I only know when I have to get vaccinated, when my doctor says something, or if I'm going back to school and they're like, oh, you need these 5 vaccines. Really? Do I? Yellow fever? I don't think so, but okay. But then you have another vaccine, which is Gardasil, or the HPV vaccine. And that's a series of 3 shots targeted to a specific age group, generally, if they have not been exposed to HPV. And then also, I think vaccines have certain limitations, like even with HPV vaccine. And I know that now that I'm saying it, may get comments on this, because there are definitely people in the community who have differing views on whether or not they should give their children the HPV vaccine, because I think that in some fairness, I think that some results are coming out that seem to be adverse, right? And so, in thinking also about ROI, it's like, well, if you have a vaccine and it affects 50% of people negatively, but the other 50% of people positively, is that enough ROI? Is that safe enough, right? You also have vaccines, I think, against like, I think it's hepatitis C, if I'm not mistaken. And the cost for that vaccine, and that is a curative vaccine, which that's also sort of brings up another paradigm, right? Is the COVID vaccine going to be a treatment vaccine, or is it going to be a preventative vaccine? And I'm not sure that we know the answers to those questions right now. So I think that there are so many questions around this. And, for myself, I have to admit, I'm not even sure. I mean, what I would like to see, ideal scenario, right, is a preventative vaccine, that is safe and effective, maybe even more so effective than, like, for example, the flu shot. I mean, I can remember living in New York, getting the flu shot and still getting sick, right? Because the shot that I got, oh, that's not this strain of flu this year. Really? Like, what the hell, right? So I just, got this shot, right, for no reason. And that's not what we want for people. We want to give people a preventative vaccine that will target, COVID, that is this COVID, this coronavirus, knowing though that it's possible for the virus to, mutate, which is why, like, for example, diseases like HIV are so difficult to cure, right? Because of where viruses can live in our bodies, and how viruses can mutate and also affect, different systems in our bodies. So there's a ton of, thinking that has to go into, the ROI. I think I was saying, like, ideally, I'd like to see a preventative vaccine, and I'd like to see a curative vaccine. I'd really love to see both. I don't know if we're going to get both, but it's an excellent question, and actually, I think it prompts me to really go and do some, some more reading on what's happening. There, like I said, there's so much, to consider, and they're moving so fast to try to get, this vaccine developed. But yet, there are all kinds of things we need to think about, like the short, medium, long term. What are the side effects, if any, of the vaccine, and how is that going to be managed from both, I think, a cost and a quality of life perspective. So I hope that's helpful in, thinking about it.
Yeah, that definitely was. Appreciate it.
Speaking about vaccines and drug delivery and treatment mechanisms, I believe there's opportunity for improving how we accept or deliver or receive vaccinations. Have you heard anything like new foods? You can just eat the food and it has the medicine or the vaccine in it, versus taking a shot or a dozen shots or a series of shots.
Are you afraid of needles?
I don't like needles, but I will do it if necessary.
Yeah. No, I'm teasing. I don't like them myself. I mean, if I have to get blood drawn, I mean, I'm a baby. I'm looking away. I want my sticker at the end. Please give me a Band-Aid. Like, I'm the biggest baby when it comes to that. But I think that, delivery of vaccines and medications is, certainly always evolving. I think the challenge is that when is the mechanism of the drug delivery, right? If, like, we take certain medications by mouth, right? Because we can ingest it. It can be, absorbed by our system, let's say through the stomach, I don't know, through the intestine, things like that. But the reason we get shots is, it may need to go directly into our muscles. It may need to go directly into our bloodstream. And certainly finding easier ways of delivering those types of medications is, I would certainly love to have new methods of drawing blood, right? There are certain medications, for example, Accutane, which is, an acne therapy for patients who have severe, like, cystic acne. And every month, the patient's required to have a blood draw to check for liver damage, right? Check for, I think it's lipids, to check the lipids, right? Why can't there be another way? Like, we've seen the COVID temperature checkers. I want somebody to put like a little sensor on my arm that can read the lipids without you having to stick me, to always collect my blood. And I think I would defer to a doctor for, more scientific, information. But I would say that I have not heard about, anything really in the space. Not that there isn't, but I have not heard about anything in the space that can kind of replace a vaccine with, with a ingestible medication. And there's so many of them, but I can't think of anything offhand right now where I'm like, wow, they took that from like a vaccine, to pill format. And then even sometimes when you take things to pill format, you get another host of complications. Like, can you digest it? Does it cause nausea? Does it cause, diarrhea? Things like that. So, that in itself may present, a number of other complications. How does it absorb in the body, right, when you ingest it versus when you, deliver it through, like an intramuscular format. I don't know. I don't know. I'm going to defer to a physician or, a nurse on that one. But certainly I am with you. I wish that we could end blood draws. Honestly, I wish we could.
All right. So there seems to be a racial disparity in pregnancy-related death. Mm-hmm. So how can healthcare professionals protect against age, racial bias, and other forms of discrimination when making decisions?
So many ways. I mean, first is not to be racist, right? The first is to have an awareness, to recognize your own bias as a physician. The second way, which is probably the more important way, I think, is to have more Black physicians at the table. The number of Black physicians in this country is very low compared to, white and other physicians. And I think that's a huge problem, and it's a problem across the board in all specialties, whether it's psychiatry, cardiology, primary care, rheumatology, nephrology, all of the specialties, right? We need more Black physicians. We need more Black health practitioners, whether that's nurses, nurse practitioners, physician assistants. We need more Black leadership in healthcare, period. And, I say that not to say that, okay, this is, just the end all, Black people at the table, but I think that the way the current system has been working has not been working for us, right? What I am optimistic about is that there are a number of Black healthcare startups that are focusing on issues in women's health, and I would say, from just first, identifying, as a woman, what does your healthcare look like physically, mentally? Pregnancy, what do I do during my pregnancy? How do I want to give birth? And what are birthing options, right? I think in maternity, period, there is, a lot of discussion on cost, right? And as a friend and mentor would say, pregnancy is almost a nightmare for insurance companies because first you were one person, now we've got to take care of two people, right? Which is really awful, it's a way to look at it, but that's true. And so we need more companies, we need more investors, we need more founders, we need more physicians and healthcare professionals at the table, really addressing these issues from our unique lens, because we have lived these stories, our families have lived these stories. And, actually, it's a good point because, there are some healthcare startups where the founder is not a physician. They're not a healthcare professional, but they recognize the problem. Like, my son has had type 1 diabetes and the care management is all over the place. So I'm going to start a company, right? My aunt was on dialysis and I had to take her there 3 to 4 times a week. How can I be disruptive in this space? We're at a point where we can also speak to those very unique issues. But I think in terms of maternity, there are a number of sort of spaces, right? And I don't want to say end to end, but I mean, first are, pre-pregnancy, during pregnancy, post-pregnancy. Something else we want to really address in our community is access to care, and also, not just physical, but also mental, right? The number of us who have postpartum, depression as Black women, we need to educate ourselves on it, understand it, and identify solutions, that we can help our loved ones deal with this, right? I think the other area that we have for change is in policy, right? For example, some states that did not expand Medicaid, right? They may give you Medicaid from the time that they learn you're pregnant to, let's say, 4 weeks after the delivery. But if you're a woman who's on, SSRIs or antidepressants, right, during pregnancy, because of postpartum, or if you have any other complex medical care, now you are set forth in the world. You've delivered this, beautiful baby, you're depressed, and your medication is going to run out in a month. Your health care is going to run out. And I've loved seeing the advocacy, from a number of Black women, like, Lauren Underwood, who's a nurse. She's also a congresswoman, who have really gone to Congress. And, even I think Kamala Harris has introduced a bill for, I think, research in fibroids, things like that, just anything that affects pregnancy. And so it's important to, have that research, have that awareness, have that advocacy, and also inform the patient so that they're able to make an informed choice about how they want to kind of go through their pregnancy, how they want to deliver, right? If they want a C-section, that's their choice, but you just want to know, are they informed about it? If they want a vaginal birth, that should be their, their choice. If it's, medically, if it, does it pose any risk to, mom and the baby, right? That should be a choice. But I think there's definitely room for more education, more policy, and more of us having a seat at the table and really speaking to our unique experiences and solving, for problems that we have in our unique experiences.
You brought up an interesting point about the founders or potential founders that may have come up with a medical product, but their background may not be in medicine or healthcare. What's the best way or what's the best strategy for that person or a group of people to come up with a strategy to better be taken seriously when pitching to like venture capital or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Glad you asked. I think the best strategy is to have a healthcare professional, on your team. And I'm not saying this to be, sarcastic. That's not at all. But I've seen companies that are tackling healthcare that have no healthcare people on their team. And I'm going, you cannot successfully enter healthcare without healthcare professionals, whether that is in public health, whether that is in, physical health, surgery, mental health, policy, etc. You need to have healthcare people at the table. And it was interesting because I had a conversation with a friend of mine who is a non-healthcare person who had gone over to a healthcare company. And she said, sometimes in tech, there's a bias against healthcare people because they say, healthcare is so regulated, it's bulky, it's bureaucratic, it's slow moving. why haven't you solved these problems? Why can't you move, this fast? But in reality, there are reasons for that, right? We can't just, fail forward or fail fast, right? You don't want to be laying on, the surgery table and your surgeon's like, fail fast, not today, not with my heart, no, thank you. So you can't always take that kind of attitude into healthcare, right? I think there are ways you can be a bit faster, a bit more specific, a bit more targeted, but I absolutely think founders must consult with healthcare professionals, whether, like I said, they're physicians, nurses, even caretakers. There's a lot of opportunity, I think, in care management, understanding how companies can drive care to the home. Like, as we kind of discussed briefly this morning with dialysis, instead of having folks go in-center to dialysis, can they do that dialysis at home, right? How can we best take care of our loved ones at home instead of having to transfer them to, a skilled nursing facility, right? And so caretakers in many ways have gone through not just the logistical challenges, but also the cost challenges, the insurance challenges, the finding the right doctor, finding the right facility. Caretakers are such an important part of healthcare delivery. And sometimes we forget those folks. But I think, you have to talk to the people who are on the ground with the issues that you're trying to solve for. I think that is a huge thing. And I think, for me, like, looking at it, let's say from, a corporate development perspective, I need to see a company, like, you can't tell me that you're going to tackle kidney disease or rare genetics without having a geneticist on your team and as part of, your advisory board, right? That just not going to fly with, with me. And it's not because the person is not passionate, or maybe they don't have, a good business model, or, revenue, or, market share, et cetera. But you just can't, I feel like, tackle these problems without having the right people on board. And those are the stakeholders who are invested in healthcare. So I think, to your point, to your question, it is having the right healthcare people on your team. I would say in a leadership format, maybe it's a chief health officer, a chief medical officer, chief advisor, also as part of your board. You definitely want to have, other folks who are in the industry, who have a stake in this, who are on your board. And that board may look a bit diverse, right? Where it has, let's say if you were tackling a surgical solution, you'd want a surgeon. You might want a patient advocate. You could even want, a former patient who has gone through adverse, reactions to, things like, let's say, mesh. We always see these commercials, people who have had these adverse reactions to, the mesh that they put in, or a medical device, so that when you're pitching to companies, you can say, look, we've got the right people who really understand this problem from multiple points of view, right? From, the physician's perspective, the caregiver's perspective, the patient perspective. And I think that should signal to a company that, they've really done their research, they've really done their due diligence, and they've really considered who the stakeholders are. And that would lead me to believe that you would really understand, who your market is and who you're trying to solve for. So I think those are definitely some things that, founders can keep in mind. And certainly if you're not a healthcare person, don't be discouraged. I think that it is something that you can do. If you, like in any industry, if you identify a problem, go forward and, solve for that problem. Just make sure, you have the right people, the stakeholders on board.
Sound like sound advice right there.
Good.
Yeah. Yes. So I'm going to change gear real quickly.
Sure.
So, of course, you and your sister have developed a new high-tech concept book series called Tsahia Codes, geared towards kids. Can you provide more detail about the book series?
Sure. This is a passion project of mine. So my sister, her name is Tsahia, and fun fact about her, I got to name her. Yeah, she was a bit of a surprise, but my mom was kind enough. She was like, "Why don't you choose your sister's name?" And she was named after a French ice skater, a Black French ice skater named Surya Bonali. So I kind of amended her name a little bit to call her Tsahia. And while I was in grad school, I got this idea um, at Columbia where, I was just thinking like, there's a lot of children's book series that focus on different careers. Like if you wanted to be a fireman or a mailman or I don't know, like Paw Patrol, or you wanted to be like an explorer, like Dora, right? That would be amazing. But there was nothing that I saw that was quite focusing on like tech and also, kids using tech. Um, and certainly nothing that I saw, at least at that time, about Black children, being in tech or, having parents who were in tech somehow. And so I started, and, my friends who know me will tell you, I am obsessed with sticky notes. And when I get ideas, I write them on sticky notes, and I have this big wall, and I would post like these sticky notes, as I'm kind of like getting my idea, going through this flow. And I'm like, this could be a great series, like Tsahia Codes. Um, I wanted to like name the characters in the book after kids, who were in my own family, right? Kind of took that personal approach at first. And, the concept behind it is, she's this little girl kind of modeled after my sister because she and I actually have a 13-year age gap. She's younger than I am. So I really got to sort of see her growing up, and she'll kill me, but, some of her, dramatics, I mean, I can still remember seeing her little face. She was very cute. Anyway, but so I had this idea. I said, it'd be great to have this book series, and put her sort of at the center, and kind of create this story about her wanting to kind of make her life better and her friends' life better through the use of technology, and really incorporating the modern day technology that kids use. Like, I'm always amazed at kids and how they use technology. And, just an example, she has a son now who's just 3 years old, my nephew. And the other day I was sitting at home and I get a FaceTime call, and he's on the other end, and he's like, "Hi, Auntie." I said, "Zuri, what are you doing? Right? Where's your mom?" And he's just talking to me, like in his 3-year-old language. I'm talking back to him. And my sister comes out and she's like, "Who are you talking to, Zuri?" And I'm like, "What's he doing with your phone?" And she's like, "I don't know how he called you." And I kid you not, this is the second time that this kid has called me. I don't know how he does it. But, when I see him, he's got his tablet, and he's got this little finger, and it's just clicking away. I mean, I'm so amazed by these kids, how they use technology. And I think that what I wanted to capture in the book is, different types of technology that they can use. So, from drone delivery, robots, FaceTime, like apps, right? How can I kind of create that in a storybook and a story series that would resonate, with kids, and that also parents would find fun to read, to their children. So it's something that's, still in development. My goal is to kind of further flesh out the story and start pitching it to publishers, because, I would love to see the project come to life. I've, shared some, like, I don't know what you call it, beta design or pre-designs, with family and friends, and they really love it. I've gotten great feedback. And so now I think it's really time for, to take it to the next level. I'm super excited about, I'm like actually very excited about that. more than a lot of things in life. And it's just funny how you can kind of find yourself going in these different directions of, writing children's books, or something else I do is I make soap. So you can see that on my website as well. But I do think it's important that all of us, if we tie it back into healthcare, right, have some kind of creative outlet, and, also some outlet where we're doing, some good for other people. And that's definitely what I hope to achieve with the book series. So thank you so much for asking me about it. It kind of gives me that additional push to go out and finally, pitch it. I can't tell you how excited I would be. I've been really working kind of through it on and off from, 2016. So for several years. It's probably time, right?
Yeah, you should definitely do it.
Yeah.
Definitely. Definitely in light of the Hidden Figures movie and
True.
all the important characters, or actually people in real life,
right.
And their accomplishments. It's definitely inspiring the next generation of engineers, technologists as well.
Right. And, I'm glad you said that too, because, I'm writing this from, perspective of like a non, technical person, but there was something I think that, when I was in grad school, I, used to fly out to San Francisco to go to conferences. And that's kind of where I went to my first wearables, and health tech conference. And I got really excited and I said, what can I do as a non-technical, or at least even at that time, like a non-clinical person to advance healthcare? And, it kind of goes to show we all have, a role that we can play within the system. So, all of that stuff just really got me excited that it's like, you can be an individual. You don't have to have a certain background, to do certain things. But did I consult with a technical person on the book? Absolutely, I did. Because I said, if I'm going to call it this, I better understand what coding is and, how it, and if it's a relevant title, right, for this particular series. So yeah, definitely. Glad to have the question, and kind of glad to have that push and, a bit of inspiration, because I too have been very inspired by just seeing people, speak up, speak out, their different creative projects, certainly more literature, also for Black children, which is amazing. I follow some authors on Twitter and Instagram. So, and, there's space and room for all of us, right? In fact, we just need more. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you for that.
I like the book idea. Will there be code snippets in the book, like a hello world or something like that?
I'm not sure, because I will say that, I'm trying to sort of figure that out a little bit. And, what I can tell you is, like, even in the first series, the concept is about Tsahia loving like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, right? That's the only thing she can cook, this little kid. She can't do anything else in the kitchen, but she can make a hell of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And so, her idea is kind of like, well, how can I teach other children to make these delicious peanut butter and jelly sandwiches that I love so much? Everything from getting the right type of bread, getting the right type of peanut butter. It's got to be crunchy, right? The right type of jelly, can't be strawberry, got to be grape, all these like different things. And so I think if there's a way to weave that in, and it can be, I would say, understandable, to the audience, then definitely I think that's a possibility, because I, certainly support, the enjoyment of the book, but also I, would love for them to really learn something from it as well. Great idea. Taking notes.
That's awesome. That's awesome. This has definitely been a very great podcast, and we want to definitely thank you for being with us and being our guest. Is there anything else that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, so one other thing, and thank you so much for having me. I think this has been a wonderful experience. I can't wait for your conference as well. Really excited about that, and I love the work that you're doing. I would say the last thing, one of the questions I think that you had originally asked too was about an in-a-visit. And so I just wanted to spend a quick minute on that. And so I learned about that term when I was at a conference, a Becker's Healthcare conference in Chicago. And there was a woman who was speaking, and she came from the hospital space. And in hospitals, right, what you want is to do, like if you're doing multiple procedures, you want it to always get better and better and better, right? Like think of knee replacement. Knee replacement quality, the more you do, the better it should be, right? And you should be able to do it in a kind of lean or agile, and very effective way for all of your patients, right? And so I thought something that she did, which was really impressive, and something that I've tried to do in my career, whether it's traveling, to different countries to learn about their health system, and also studying other companies in terms of, how are companies able to achieve sort of lean operational success, right? How does production happen? And in this case, I think she had gone to visit the Toyota plant, because Toyota is known, for this kind of very Toyota, I think they call it Toyota lean system. And so what could healthcare executives take from, a Toyota factory, right? And how can they apply it to a healthcare setting, specifically like a surgical setting, and or even things like organizational setting, right? You think about all the supplies that are kept in your doctor's office. Are they organized? If something happens, can they quickly reach for an extra set of gloves? Can they quickly reach for a syringe, right? All of those things matter. How, what is the function and flow of the office space? What is the function and flow of the OR, of the storage space, all of these things. And so, taking an in-a-visit is something that I like to do sort of, whether it's through podcasts or, maybe after COVID, visiting companies and really understanding, even though they're not healthcare companies, what can I take from them and how can I learn from them and apply it to healthcare? And I think that's something that we as healthcare professionals have to do, is we have to be open to outside ideas, and we also have to be open, to learning different ways of doing things. And I think we can learn that across various, industries in like tech, manufacturing, retail, right? Thinking about the experience, going to your doctor's office, is it, and maybe comparing it to, I don't know, shopping at Nordstrom, right? Shopping at Nordstrom, might be a very pleasant experience for you. Are you getting the same kind of experience, in your doctor's office? In the hospital cafeteria, is it similar to, like your favorite coffee shop? Is it quiet? Is it clean? Is it, does it serve the food and, type of things that you want to eat, right? So there's so many areas where we can learn from. And I think it's kind of goes back just a bit to the point about founders, and kind of goes to show, well, you can take what you've learned also from your industry and apply that to your healthcare startup, right? And I think it will only enhance, patient care and patient outcomes. So that I would leave it at that, but, and just say, keep learning, keep growing, keep developing, because, this industry is ever changing, as we can see, and there's a lot of opportunities as well.
Hey, thanks again. This has been an insightful podcast.
Great. Thank you so much. And I hope you both enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thank you. We hope you enjoy your Sunday as well.
Thank you. I'm on my way. But this is a good start. This is a great start to my Sunday. So thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you for being a guest.
Absolutely.
Oh, how can people, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Oh, definitely. I think social media, I'm at Tsahia, Tsahia, and through email, it's tsahia@tsahia.com. So you can always find me. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I do check my messages. So yeah, I tend to check everything. I check everything. So whatever is, is their best medium, just look for Tsahia and you'll find me.
Excellent.
Awesome. But thank you again.
Absolutely.
That wraps up this episode of the Disruptive Podcast by Minority Innovation Weekend. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe. Check us out online at www.minorityinnovationweekend.org and connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. MIW 2020 is coming up on Saturday, October 3rd to the 4th, so head on over to www.minorityinnovationweekend.org and register for MIW 2020 today.